Moose represent Maine, to me, you know? They really do. They're a big symbol of what Maine is.
Well, moose is my favorite animal.
Just the Maine woods.
The king of the North Woods.
For years, Maine's moose have stood as icons of the northern wilderness, towering, resilient, and seemingly untouchable.
Wiped out nearly 90% of moose calves tracked by scientists in part of Maine last year. 60 calves died in an area northwest.
But when biologists began finding clusters of dead calves scattered through the deep woods, the discovery sparked one of the most unsettling wildlife investigations in modern American ecology. What was the state's most beloved giant so quickly and so quietly? The answer, researchers soon learned, was far more disturbing than anyone expected. Why moose are dying in clusters inside Maine's unsettling wildlife crisis. The warning signs crept in quietly at first. A dead calf here, another there. Nothing unusual for a species as large and vulnerable as the moose during harsh winters. But when biologists began snowshoeing deep into Maine's northern forests and stumbled upon not one or two bodies, but clusters of them often within the same stretch of woods, the alarm grew impossible to ignore. Something was the moose, and it was happening fast. What shocked researchers wasn't just the number of deaths, but the condition of the bodies. Many calves were found gaunt, patches of fur missing, their skin raw and exposed. Some were so thin, their ribs pushed sharply against their hides. The scene looked less like ordinary winter mortality and more like a mass collapse, and the bodies carried a grim calling card. Thousands upon thousands of tiny, dark parasites clinging to exposed skin, matting fur and covering legs, bellies, and necks. The cause, once documented, was as horrifying as it was small. The winter tick, the nightmare fuel. How can such small parasites cause a huge threat to the giants of the state? These ticks aren't the typical kind that drop on and off a host throughout their life cycle. Instead, winter ticks attach themselves to a single moose and stay put for months, feeding continuously as they mature. In a normal winter, deep early snows interrupt this process, knocking many ticks off before they can find a host. But as Maine has shifted toward warmer autumns and shorter winters, the parasite has gained an unmistakable advantage. Biologists reported individual calves carrying tens of thousands of ticks. Some heavily infested calves were estimated to host more than 70,000 parasites. The effect of that kind of blood loss is devastating. Moose calves, already born into winter with limited energy reserves, can't withstand the ongoing drain. They weaken, stop feeding, and eventually collapse from a combination of anemia, exposure, and starvation. By the time researchers find them in early spring, the damage is long done. Even adult moose are not spared. While their large bodies can initially withstand the blood loss better than calves, the constant irritation triggers endless grooming, rubbing against trees, biting their own skin, scraping off patches of fur. This leaves them with what biologists grimly call ghost moose, animals so stripped of fur that their pale skin shows through, giving them a sickly, ghost-like appearance. Without their insulating coat, adults struggle through frigid nights, burning precious calories and growing weaker by the day. Yet winter ticks are only part of the story. Experts now describe the situation as a perfect storm of ecological pressures. In many regions of Maine, moose populations have been high for years, partially because the landscape, with expanses of regenerating forest, provides abundant food. This sounds like a good thing, but higher moose density means ticks can move easily from host to host. When one season's ticks survive in overwhelming numbers, the problem doesn't just persist, it compounds. Climate patterns play a major role as well. Shorter winters mean snow arrives later, giving ticks a longer window in the fall to climb vegetation and latch onto passing moose. Early spring thaws allow ticks to reproduce sooner. Each mild season fuels the next outbreak. As one biologist put it, the ticks aren't changing. The environment is. And the moose, built for brutal winters and deep snows, are suffering the consequences. These cascading effects have produced staggering mortality rates among calves in certain regions. In some study areas, nearly 9 out of 10 tracked calves have died in a single season. The number is so high that even seasoned wildlife teams admit they were unprepared for the scale of loss. The most jarring part is the timeline. The calves often survive the harshest months of snow and cold, only to perish in late winter or early spring, right when survival should be most promising. The term tick storm has emerged among field crews. In badly affected zones, every moose encountered, dead or alive, is crawling with parasites. When crews examine carcasses, the ticks cling stubbornly, even in death, a chilling reminder of the parasite's grip. The late winter woods become a landscape marked by suffering, bare patches of bark where moose have rubbed themselves raw, blood-stained snow under thrashed saplings, trails dotted with clumps of fur. Some wildlife managers argue that part of the problem is human-shaped habitat. Large tracts of forest cut simultaneously create uniform regrowth, ideal feeding grounds for moose. This leads to dense clusters of animals, and those clusters become breeding hotspots for ticks. A thriving moose population, under the wrong conditions, can inadvertently fuel its own decline. The collapse feels sudden, but in reality, it's the result of years of subtle ecological shifts stacking atop one another. Climate, habitat, density, parasites. Together, they form a quiet but lethal equation. The deaths aren't random and they aren't one-off. They point to a system under strain and a species caught in the middle of that strain with no natural defense. By the time spring melts the snow and the forest bursts back to life, the toll of winter becomes clear. Survivors stumble into warm weather, thin, scarred, and exhausted. Many calves are gone. Adult cows produce fewer calves the following year. Entire pockets of the population wobble, and across Maine, a worrying question echoes among those who study these giants. How long can the moose endure a battle they were never built to fight? With the crisis growing harder to ignore, Maine's government was forced to step in, and the response reshaped how the state manages its most iconic animal. Government efforts and preservation. Maine's fight to save its moose. When the magnitude of the moose die-off became undeniable, Maine's wildlife agencies realized the crisis was bigger than any single harsh winter. It wasn't a fluke, it was a pattern, and one that demanded a coordinated, statewide response. For decades, Maine had managed its moose population mostly through hunting permits, habitat monitoring, and occasional research projects. But the clusters of dead calves forced the state to rethink almost everything it thought it knew about moose management. The first step was data, real, long-term, high-frequency data. Maine launched one of the most ambitious moose tracking programs in North America, outfitting calves and adult cows with GPS collars that pinged locations every few hours. When a collar stopped moving, crews mobilized immediately. This allowed biologists to pinpoint when a moose died, assess the cause, and document patterns that had previously gone unnoticed. The result was a fuller, grimmer understanding of how widespread the issue truly was. Once the scale was mapped, Maine's government shifted its focus toward managing the environment moose were surviving or failing in. One of the most controversial strategies involved adjusting moose hunting permits. On the surface, increasing permits to reduce the moose population might seem counterintuitive, especially when public sentiment toward moose is overwhelmingly protective, but fewer moose means fewer available hosts for winter ticks. That reduction can, over several seasons, slow the parasite's spread. The policy wasn't about culling for sport, it was an ecological intervention aimed at giving the remaining population a fighting chance. Parallel to this, Maine began working closely with landowners and logging companies. Large blocks of forest in northern Maine are privately owned, and how they are harvested directly influences moose habitat. Younger forests, the kind that emerge after heavy cutting, attract moose because of the abundant new growth. But these areas also concentrate moose, making it easier for ticks to spread. By coordinating harvest cycles, testing staggered cuts, and encouraging varied regrowth patterns, the state aimed to break up moose hot zones without damaging the timber industry. It's a delicate balance. Maintain the forest economy while also reducing ecological stress on moose. Maine also launched public education campaigns aimed at hunters, outdoor workers, and rural communities. Winter tick outbreaks aren't easily visible until the damage is extreme, so the state pushed for people to report sightings of hairless moose, weakened calves, or unusual behavior. This kind of early reporting helps biologists map outbreaks in real time and predict where the next season may hit hardest. Alongside these on-the-ground efforts, Maine invested more deeply in climate and environmental research. The message from scientists was clear: shorter winters and warmer autumns fuel winter ticks. The state can manage hosts and habitat, but controlling the broader climate forces at play requires long-term commitments to sustainability. While moose management isn't typically part of climate policy, the connection has become impossible to ignore. Moose have, in many ways, become a symbol of what subtle warming trends can do to even the strongest species. Perhaps the most forward-thinking step Maine has taken is designing what it calls adaptive management zones. These are large landscape areas where the state tests different moose strategies, adjusting population density, habitat structure, tick monitoring, and harvest limits, and comparing outcomes across zones. It's an experimental, flexible model that allows Maine to shift strategies quickly as new patterns emerge. Instead of relying on a single statewide plan, the state now treats moose management like a living system, one that changes with every season, every temperature shift, and every tick cycle. None of this guarantees survival. The state knows that. But Maine's approach reflects a fundamental understanding. The moose crisis can't be solved with one solution or one season. It requires continuous adaptation, collaboration with landowners and communities, and a willingness to make decisions that may be unpopular but necessary. In the face of a parasite too small to see from a distance but powerful enough to giants, Maine's government is choosing to fight not with dramatic gestures, but with methodical, data-driven persistence. And for now, that steady, evolving strategy is the moose's best chance. What now, then? As of 2025, Maine's moose herd remains one of the largest in the lower 48 states. The state estimates the population at around 70,000 animals, a bit lower than some earlier estimates, but still vast. But large doesn't mean safe. In recent years, heavy infestations of winter ticks, aggravated by milder autumns and warmer winters, have sharply depressed calf survival and reduced female fertility. In 2022, biologists recorded an appalling 86% calf mortality rate in a monitored group. Although improvements followed, zones under experimental population density reduction saw calf deaths drop to as low as 8% in spring 2024. Still, scientists warn that the gains are fragile. As winter tick counts are rising again, 2025 may bring another tough cycle. In short, Maine's moose remain numerous, but their future depends heavily on whether tick outbreaks stay under control and whether enough calves survive each year. From small numbers to one of the largest moose populations in the U.S., Maine's forests have become a sanctuary for these giants. But how did they get here? Giants of the North and their expansive realm. If you picture Maine, you likely imagine vast forests stretching to the horizon, rivers cutting through thick wilderness, and the quiet stillness of the North Woods. Amid that solitude, one animal reigns as king of the landscape, the moose.
The moose is Maine. It's
that big majestic animal that's out there in the swamps and the bogs is seen as a symbol of the state of Maine. They are Maine.
Towering, solitary, and oddly graceful, moose define Maine's wild character. They are more than wildlife icons. They are the embodiment of the state's forests and rivers, and they have become a living measurement of ecological health. Maine's moose story begins with near disappearance. By the early 20th century, overhunting and habitat loss had driven moose populations dangerously low. Only a few hundred moose survived in the northernmost stretches of the state, their presence precarious and fragmented. But as the decades passed, regulations on hunting tightened, and forests left fallow for decades began to regrow. The landscape transformed into a patchwork of young stands and mature woodland, creating ideal browsing grounds for moose. Slowly, population numbers climbed, and by the late 20th century, Maine became home to one of the largest moose populations in the eastern United States. A remarkable recovery story by any measure. Since then, Maine's moose are most abundant in the northern and western reaches of the state, from the rugged slopes around Baxter State Park to the vast tracts of forest in Aroostook County. Although, as mentioned, it has faced a decrease in population because of a few factors. The Moosehead Lake region, famous for its dense forests and pristine waterways, supports one of the most visible populations. These regions offer a combination of key elements moose need to thrive: dense young growth for browse, wetlands for summer forage, and deep snow areas that help regulate population distribution in winter. The animals are highly mobile, moving seasonally between winter ranges and summer feeding grounds. In winter, they may travel to lower elevations or ridges with wind-swept snow, while in summer, wetlands and ponds provide cool relief and a rich diet of aquatic plants. Population estimates are notoriously difficult. Moose are solitary, spread across dense forests, and wary of humans, making aerial surveys or ground counts challenging. Yet biologists estimate Maine's population numbers tens of thousands, concentrated in multiple core zones. For much of the 2000s, calf recruitment remained high, adult survival steady, and the species appeared robust. It's worth noting that the very success of this population recovery has created new challenges. Denser populations increase contact between moose, which in turn raises the risk of parasites, disease, and resource competition. In some ways, success has made the species more vulnerable, a dynamic wildlife managers must now navigate carefully. Maine's moose population is remarkable not just in size, but in its cultural and economic significance, and the state aims to maintain it. Moose are a cornerstone of rural tourism. Snowmobilers, hunters, and wildlife watchers flock north in the hopes of catching a glimpse of these giants. Moose hunting itself is a deeply ingrained tradition, regulated carefully to maintain population balance. The animal is woven into the state's identity. License plates, tourism brochures, and outdoor narratives all feature the moose as a symbol of Maine's rugged wilderness. But that symbolic power also complicates conservation. Any move to adjust population numbers, change hunting quotas, or intervene in habitat can provoke strong public reactions. Moose are not just numbers in a wildlife database. They are cultural icons, economic assets, and emotional touchstones for local communities. Ecologically, moose are ecosystem engineers. By browsing selectively on shrubs, Young trees and aquatic plants, they shape the composition of the forest understory. Their feeding patterns create small clearings that allow sunlight to reach the ground, promoting plant diversity and providing habitat for smaller animals. Trails they carve through forests and wetlands serve as corridors not only for themselves, but for other wildlife. Moose also influence predator-prey dynamics. Wolves and bears, where present, target calves or weakened adults, helping maintain natural selection pressures. Even their carcasses, when death inevitably comes, feed scavengers from ravens to coyotes, returning nutrients to the soil and influencing micro-ecosystems. The population's distribution is also influenced by climate and habitat. Maine lies at the southern edge of the moose's natural boreal range. Here, winters are less severe than in Canada or Alaska, which historically limited tick infestations, but now allows parasites to thrive under milder conditions. The interplay between climate, forest age, and moose density is delicate. Managers must balance food availability with spacing needs to reduce parasite load and avoid creating concentrated, hot zones that can accelerate winter tick infestations. Demographically, Maine's moose populations are structured by adult survival, reproductive rates, and calf recruitment. Adult cows typically produce one calf per year, sometimes twins in ideal conditions. Calf survival rates, however, are now highly variable due to winter ticks and changing environmental conditions. In areas of high mortality, entire cohorts vanish, leaving long-term gaps in population structure. These gaps echo through the ecosystem, affecting predator-prey interactions, forest composition, and even future moose numbers decades later. Interestingly, Maine's moose occupy a liminal space, geographically and ecologically. While Alaska and Canada boast enormous populations, northern New England moose face the southernmost challenges of their boreal niche. They are simultaneously thriving in habitat abundance, yet vulnerable to ecological pressures like climate change and parasitic outbreaks. That duality makes Maine's population a bellwether for what's happening to moose at the southern edges of their range. The relationship between humans and moose in Maine is inseparable from population management. Wildlife agencies rely on a mix of data collection, public input, and adaptive policies to maintain balance. Moose watchers and hunters contribute observations. Local communities voice concerns about collisions, agriculture, and tourism. Biologists combine this human intelligence with fieldwork to guide decision-making. The result is a population that is simultaneously a biological marvel, a cultural treasure, and a complex challenge for conservationists. Maine's moose are far more than just numbers on a map. They are a living, breathing symbol of recovery and resilience, a measuring stick of ecological health, and a reminder of how human, animal, and environmental systems intersect. Their expansive range, abundance, and cultural significance make them one of the most studied and cherished populations in the United States. Yet, their very success carries new risks that will define conservation for years to come. Understanding where moose live and how many there are is only the first step. To truly see their impact, we must step closer and watch how they live, feed, and shape the forests around them. Guardians of Maine's ecosystem. In the quiet of Maine's forests, moose move like ghosts, enormous silhouettes against a backdrop of pine and birch, bending saplings under the weight of massive antlers, or stepping carefully through snow and bog. They are solitary creatures, almost mythic in their independence. Yet their lives are intimately intertwined with the rhythms of the land. To understand Maine's moose is to understand the pulse of the northern wilderness itself, the seasons, the forests, the wetlands, and the hidden webs of life that depend on them. Moose are built for extremes, standing over 6 feet at the shoulder and tipping the scales at up to 1,500 pounds, they are armored in thick fur and a layer of insulating fat that allows survival through the harshest winters. Their long legs and broad hooves let them navigate deep snow, marshes, and rivers with surprising grace. In spring and summer, their diet shifts to young shoots, leaves, and aquatic plants, which not only provide essential nutrients, but also keep wetlands in balance. Moose grazing can control the growth of certain plants, preventing overdominance of aggressive species and maintaining a mosaic of vegetation that supports a variety of birds, insects, and small mammals. Moose behavior is largely dictated by the seasons. In winter, when snow blankets northern Maine, they slow down, conserving energy and sticking to areas with accessible browse. They often inhabit dense forests or wind-swept ridges where snow is lighter and movement is easier. This seasonal strategy is vital for survival, but it also puts moose in close contact with one another, which, in the case of winter ticks, has devastating consequences. Spring brings a new rhythm. Calves are born, water's warm, and the animals disperse into wetlands where aquatic plants dominate their diet. Rivers and ponds are more than food sources. They are cooling refuges, a break from the heat of the emerging spring sun, and a natural deterrent against insects. Reproduction adds another layer of complexity to moose life. The mating season, or rut, occurs in the fall, when bull moose clash in dramatic displays of strength. Antlers, shed annually, are more than decorative. They are weapons and symbols of dominance. Bulls that win the right to mate exert tremendous influence on the gene pool, while cows carefully select mates based on health, size, and vigor. Each pregnancy and subsequent calf represents a gamble, particularly as environmental pressures mount. A single calf lost to ticks, starvation, or predation is not just a personal tragedy. It impacts the population structure for years to come. Predation and mortality are also part of the moose's life story. While adult moose have few natural predators in Maine, black bears occasionally take calves, and coyotes target the weakest. The real threat is environmental. Harsh winters, deep snow, and parasites like winter ticks combine in deadly ways. Even accidents like slipping on ice or collisions with vehicles add to the mortality toll. Moose mortality shapes the ecosystem in subtle but profound ways. Carcasses provide nutrients for scavengers, enrich the soil, and influence plant growth patterns, feeding into a complex, interdependent web. Beyond their own survival, moose are ecosystem engineers. Their browsing habits alter forest composition, controlling sapling density and influencing which tree species thrive. By creating open areas in dense brush, moose indirectly support ground-nesting birds, small mammals, and pollinators that require sunlight to reach the forest floor. Their movement through wetlands helps circulate nutrients, while their footprints form microchannels that facilitate water flow and seed dispersal. Every step a moose takes changes its environment in ways both obvious and invisible. Moose also serve as indicators of environmental health. Scientists track population dynamics, birth rates, mortality, and behavior to gauge the broader state of Maine's forests. When moose thrive, the ecosystem is generally stable. When they struggle, it's often a sign of deeper imbalances, whether it's climate shifts, habitat loss, or disease outbreaks. In this way, moose act as living barometers, giant, mobile warning systems for a changing northern landscape.
You can't think of Maine without thinking about the moose. You just can't. You can't even think of Maine without the moose. If we lose that, we've lost something we'll never get back again, and that's the soul and heart of this state.
Socially, moose are quiet but complex. While solitary most of the year, Interactions between individuals during the rut or in overlapping feeding areas create brief but intense social dynamics. Mothers and calves share bonds that are essential for the survival of the young. Observers have documented extraordinary maternal care, from leading calves to rich feeding sites to protective behaviors against predators or aggressive bulls. These relationships shape behavior, survival, and the transmission of knowledge about local terrain and resources. Moose also influence human culture and livelihoods. They are central to Maine's identity, drawing wildlife watchers, photographers, and hunters. Their presence supports ecotourism and rural economies. Yet, their proximity to humans can lead to conflict, vehicle collisions, property damage, and management debates. Balancing conservation and coexistence has become a hallmark of moose management in the state. It's a delicate interplay between appreciation, protection, and practicality. Finally, moose represent a convergence of biology, ecology, and narrative. Every feeding pattern, migration route, and mortality event tells a story about climate, habitat, parasites, and survival. Scientists have spent decades piecing together these stories, and yet every year brings new revelations. How a calf survives a brutal winter, how an adult navigates tick-infested forests, how the species adapts to subtle shifts in temperature and snow cover. All of it informs conservation strategies, ecological theory, and our understanding of what it means to share a landscape with one of North America's most extraordinary mammals. Maine's moose are more than wildlife. They are ecosystem engineers, climate indicators, cultural icons, and living symbols of resilience and vulnerability. Their lifestyle, solitary yet impactful, seasonal yet adaptive, shapes forests, wetlands, and human imagination alike. To witness a moose in the wild is to glimpse the pulse of an entire northern ecosystem, and to understand that each giant carries within it a story of survival, adaptation, and the ongoing balance of life in Maine's forests. Survival at the edge. Maine's moose have long been symbols of the state's rugged wilderness, towering, solitary, and resilient. Yet today, the future of these giants is uncertain. Heavy infestations of winter ticks, climate change, habitat pressures, and human activity have created a precarious environment where survival is no longer guaranteed. Scientists and wildlife managers warn that if current trends continue unchecked, Maine's moose could face severe population declines, though extinction is not yet imminent. The real danger lies in a slow, silent erosion of numbers, driven by the death of calves and reduced reproductive success. Winter ticks remain the primary threat. Each year, tens of thousands attach to young and adult moose alike, feeding relentlessly and draining vital energy. Calves, especially, are at risk. The loss of even a single generation can ripple across the population for years. With climate models predicting milder winters and longer autumns, the conditions that allow winter ticks to flourish are likely to persist, making the cycle of high mortality an ongoing concern. Without interventions, some areas of northern Maine could see population collapses similar to those recorded in recent years. Yet extinction is far from inevitable. Moose are remarkably adaptable animals. Maine's forests, with their mix of young regrowth, wetlands, and older woodlands, provide abundant forage and space for dispersal. Conservation efforts, such as carefully managed hunting, habitat management, and population monitoring, are already giving moose a fighting chance. By reducing population density in hotspots,
Northeastern Minnesota's moose population has been on a long-term decline from an estimated 8,840 in 2006 to an estimated 3,450 last winter.
biologists can limit tick spread and increase calf survival. offering a model for maintaining healthy populations despite ecological pressures. Looking forward, adaptation will be key. Moose populations may shift their ranges slightly, moving toward cooler, higher elevation areas or spreading farther from heavily tick-infested zones. Habitat restoration that encourages forest diversity, wetland preservation, and natural corridors for movement can help the species thrive. Scientists are also studying selective breeding and monitoring genetic diversity to ensure long-term resilience. Every calf that survives a harsh winter, every adult that successfully reproduces, is a small victory for the species' continuity. Human intervention will continue to play a critical role. Educating communities about coexistence, managing hunting quotas, and mitigating vehicle collisions are all part of a broader strategy. Moose watchers, landowners, and researchers must work together to maintain the delicate balance between population growth and ecological health. In many ways, Maine's moose are testing the limits of modern wildlife management, illustrating how a species can survive only through a combination of natural resilience and human-guided stewardship. Maine's moose will likely continue to persist, though in smaller numbers and with more careful management than in past decades. They are not doomed to vanish entirely, but survival will depend on science, habitat, and climate working in tandem. The coming years are a critical period. Each decision made by biologists, policymakers, and citizens could tip the scales toward either recovery or further decline. For now, the moose stand as a living reminder that even the most iconic creatures are not immune to environmental pressures, and that the wild, when properly protected and managed, can endure against formidable odds. Maine's moose might be fighting for survival, and their story is far from over. Subscribe to follow more wildlife adventures right here in this channel.